You hear the name Bach, and what comes to mind? Probably this idea of divine, almost effortless genius, right? But what if I told you the real story behind that incredible music isn't about pure inspiration? What if it's actually about intense pressure and constant confinement? Well, that's the paradox we're going to unravel today. Yeah, that's the big question we're digging into here. We have this romantic image of the artist as a totally free spirit, but Bach's life, it was anything but. So the real question is, did all those rules and restrictions hold him back? Or did they, somehow, unleash his true power? So, okay, let's just bust this myth right from the get-go. The popular image is Bach, the lone genius just channeling music directly from the heavens. The reality? He was a working guy. A civil servant for the church, a teacher, a craftsman who was treated more like a skilled carpenter, and a dad just trying to pay the bills. This is where our story really gets interesting. First up, let's talk about his number one boss, the Lutheran Church in the 18th century. Now, this wasn't just a side gig for him. This institution pretty much dictated the terms of his entire creative existence. It was his biggest paycheck, for sure, but it was also his ultimate censor. And this isn't just speculation. I mean, check this out. These are words straight from his employment contract in Leipzig. He wasn't told, go be brilliant, innovate. No, he was told, keep it short, don't get too dramatic or operatic, and make sure it inspires devotion. Basically, no showing off. And believe me, his bosses were serious about this. At the time, there were these religious movements, like Pietism, that were all about simple, emotional worship. They looked at Bach's complex, dense, layered music, the stuff we now call genius, and they called it intellectual vanity. Can you even imagine that? Being told your masterpiece is just too clever for its own good? But here's the crazy twist. This very same constraint, it became an incredible engine for his creativity. The church demanded a brand new cantata, a big, substantial piece of music. Not every month, every single week. That relentless deadline forced a level of work out of him that was it was almost superhuman. It's how we got this massive, magnificent library of his work. All right, so if dealing with the church wasn't demanding enough, Bach also had to play the game in the treacherous world of aristocratic patronage. See, Germany back then was this patchwork of little kingdoms, and each one was run by a prince with his own tastes, his own ego, and his own whims. And you gotta love how Bach himself put it. He perfectly captured how unstable this life was. Job security was basically a fantasy. One day you're the celebrated court composer, the next your boss could just lose interest, convert to a new religion, or, just plain run out of cash. Here's a perfect example. At one point, Bach worked for a Calvinist prince who basically banned fancy music in church. That sounds like a career killer for a church musician, right? But that vacuum, that lack of sacred work to do, is exactly what pushed him to create some of his most legendary secular pieces, like the Brandenburg Concertos and the cello suites. The constraint literally created the opportunity. And if you want to know how little power he really had, get this. In 1717, he tried to quit his job to take a better one, and his employer, a duke, had him thrown in jail for a month, just for having the nerve to want to leave. He wasn't this revered artist we think of today. He was basically considered skilled property. Which, of course, brings us to maybe the most relatable constraint of them all. Money. You just can't talk about Bach's art without talking about the constant, grinding pressure he was under to provide for his family. Just look at this number, 20. Bach was the father to 20 children. So yeah, you better believe that for him, economics wasn't some boring background detail. It was the engine that drove almost every decision he made, day in and day out. And he had this sort of morbidly witty way of putting it himself. His salary was literally tied to the life and death of his community. If it was a healthy season and not many people died, well, that could mean real financial trouble for the Bach household. It's wild to think about. So what do you do with that kind of pressure? Well, you get resourceful. Incredibly resourceful. He perfected this thing called the parody technique. And no, it has nothing to do with making fun of other music. It was all about smart, efficient musical recycling. Here's how it worked. It's genius, really. He'd get a paying gig, right, like composing a birthday tribute for some prince. Then, to meet that relentless church deadline, he'd take that exact same music, pull out the birthday text, pop in some sacred lyrics, and boom! A new piece for huge work like the Christmas oratorio. It's brilliant time management.
And the man hustled. To make extra money, he directed this student music group that played gigs at a local coffee house. And that's how we ended up with these incredible, unexpected gems, like the Coffee Cantata, which is this funny, satirical piece about a woman who's basically addicted to coffee. This was Bach, the entrepreneur, finding a way to make it work.
Okay, so there's one last huge constraint we need to talk about, and this one is purely intellectual. See, we think of music as all art and emotion, but in Bach's time, it was also seen as a mathematical science, like a direct reflection of God's perfectly ordered universe. You have to remember, for centuries, music was part of what they called the quadrivium. It was a core part of a higher education, taught right alongside arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. So for Bach, finding the right note wasn't just about what felt good, it was like solving a mathematical proof or discovering an astronomical truth. I know, it looks like scary math, but what this formula really is, it's the code for a revolution. It's the physics behind a new way of tuning keyboard instruments, the well-tempered system, that lets you play beautifully in every single key for the first time. He wasn't just breaking rules for fun. He was systematically exploring the absolute limits of a brand new mathematical and acoustic universe. So, after all that, where does this leave us? What's the real legacy of this man who was bound by the church, bound by petty princes, bound by money, and even bound by the laws of musical physics? Well, it's a legacy of forging freedom directly from all that friction. This is the key, right here. Bach's constraints weren't a cage. They were the banks of a river. Without them, all that talent might have just dispersed into a shallow pool. But with them, that genius was forced to run deep and fast and with incredible power. His greatness didn't happen in spite of his world, it happened because of it. At the end of his sacred pieces, he'd often write this phrase, Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone the glory. This was his official motto, his stated purpose, the divine mission that gave a higher meaning to all that hard work and struggle. But let's be real. He was also a practical guy who knew what he was worth. He served God, absolutely, but he always made sure his earthly employers honored their contracts, preferably in cold, hard cash. And it's right there, in that beautiful contradiction, that we find the real man behind the infinite music.